Hello again, 110. In today's video, I am going to go over Chapter 8, the federal courts. And the courts serve the essential functions of settling disputes and interpreting the law. And as we have stated in previous videos, this is a result of Marbury versus Madison. This established what the Supreme Court at the highest level is going to do. One of the problems with the court system is that it's very separate and it's very independent. And many states and federal judges completely have life terms. And that's problematic for a democratic society because once they get there, they're there for good. And these judges are human beings, and they're going to have the same sorts of political values as any normal person does. And depending upon what their ideology is, that is going to influence their decision making. It's really worth it in this particular chapter to go through all of the PowerPoint slides. I use quite a few of them in this chapter and pretty much for the rest of the semester. There are three types of law: criminal, which usually is enforced at the state and local level, having to do with some kind of violation of moral or ethical codes. There is civil law or private law, which usually involves some sort of financial dispute. Tort cases are disputes that come out of failure to meet obligation. And this is what you must prove in a tort case in order to get a favorable settlement. Absence of malice indicates no failure to meet an obligation. You must prove negligence and malice in order to get a favorable tort solution. Public law is the third type, or constitutional law, and administrative law is another type of public law as well. This is where the government is going to be the defendant. In all court cases, you have the plaintiff, the person bringing the suit, and the defendant that is being charged. And here again is another slide telling you the three types of law. Be familiar with them. Precedent and stare decisis. Stare decisis is another Latin term. Latin's very important in the law, which literally means let the decision stand. It is the judicial principle that prior precedents should only be overturned in very rare circumstances, and especially at the Supreme Court level, this is a concept that is followed. Most cases are heard at the state and local level. Cases are heard in federal court only if they involve federal laws, treaty, or the Constitution. Here on Saipan, if you want some sort of federal court influence, you're going to have to identify your constitutional rights as being jeopardized in the case from the very beginning when you bring the suit. Otherwise, it will end at the district court here. Article 3 establishes the judicial branch, and it gives the Supreme Court both original and appellate or appeal jurisdiction in most federal cases. And this is also where Congress was granted the power to create the lower court system. And this is what they came up with in the Judiciary Act, and it hasn't really changed too much. This hierarchical structure still exists today. The Court of Appeals were established in the late 19th century. I don't remember the exact year. It doesn't matter. Originally, Supreme Court justices also had to ride the circuit and serve on courts of appeal. Instead, at that time in the 19th century, another layer was created. Another system of judges was appointed to serve on these courts, and it relieved them, the Supreme Court justices, from having to do that duty as well. And here's a quick question for you. And the answer here will be A. The state trial court was where that would be heard first. The judicial power was established in Article 3, and it said it shall be vested in one Supreme Court. Again, Marbury established what the Supreme Court was going to do. Today, it has the chief and 8 associates. The chief presides over public sessions and gets to speak first during deliberations and gets to vote last. We have talked about this idea of judicial review. This is just fundamental PS 110. The Jefferson administration failed to give Mr. Marbury his commission, his Justice of the Peace job. He sued under the Judiciary Act, and the court said that Mr. Madison, the Secretary of State in the Jefferson administration, did not have to give Marbury his position. The writ of mandamus was denied in this case, and the court overturned this part of the Judiciary Act, compelling them to do this in this case. Mr. Marshall, writing the opinion for the court, said that in foreign appointments that they could issue this writ, but not in domestic hirings. And this has long-term consequences because while Marbury lost his case, the Federalists won the war over the Jeffersonians because this established the idea of judicial review and the idea of overturning acts of Congress and declaring things constitutional or unconstitutional. In the long run now, this is what they've been doing, and nobody has ever disputed this. There is nothing in the Constitution written that says the Supreme Court will engage in judicial review, but since Marbury, that is what they do, much to Mr. Jefferson's chagrin. And here are some other ways it's been used to reverse state actions, to overturn federal agency actions, to challenge presidential action, as in Nixon and Watergate, and to overturn federal law, as it did in Marbury. They do not give advisory opinions. They must have standing. The case must not be moot. In other words, a case that no longer requires resolution. Their judicial power extends to cases and controversies where there are conflicting precedents. And they meet to hear the preferences and priorities of the justices. This is where the clerks come in. This is a very prestigious job that law school graduates vie for. They generate memos or written legal briefs on various cases, and eventually they meet to grant certiorari. A writ of certiorari is a formal request by an appellant to have the Supreme Court review a decision of a lower court. And it's granted when 4 or more justices agree. And it usually, again, it revolves around conflicting decisions by lower courts. And that's about it for this particular chapter.